I just pulled into my driveway when I got the call. It was Jason, my neighbor, and his voice was panicked. You need to get home, now. Some guy is in the pool with Emily, and the whole neighborhood is watching. My heart sank. I felt the blood drain from my face as I slammed the car door and rushed to the backyard. I didn't know what to expect, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. There she was, my wife, Emily, laughing, draped all over some guy in our pool. Mark, the guy from her yoga class, was holding her close, and their chemistry was undeniable. They didn't even notice me at first. My stomach twisted. How could she do this to me? This wasn't just a moment of weakness, it was betrayal in its most blatant form. As I stood frozen in the doorway, Emily looked up, her eyes widening in shock. And just like that, her carefree attitude turned into something cold, defensive, as if I was the one intruding on her fun. I was livid. I needed answers. But what she said next, what she had the nerve to say, left me speechless. Oh my God, Andrew, relax. It's just some fun. You wouldn't understand. And in that moment, everything I knew about my marriage, everything I had trusted, shattered in front of my eyes. My body felt frozen as I stood in the doorway, watching my wife, Emily, and Mark in the pool. I could hear the sounds of laughter, splashing, and that sickeningly casual tone in their voices. They were so absorbed in each other, as if I didn't even exist. Jason's voice echoed in my mind, some guy is doing your wife in the pool, and the whole neighborhood can see it. I had hoped it was some misunderstanding, some sick joke, but the truth was standing right in front of me, in the form of Emily's arms wrapped around Mark. My heart pounded in my chest as I took slow, deliberate steps toward them. Each step felt like an eternity, my thoughts racing. Was this really happening? Was I about to confront my wife about something I never could have imagined? I took a deep breath before walking toward them. Mark saw me first and froze. His eyes widened with a mixture of surprise and panic. It didn't seem like he was afraid of me, no, it was something deeper. Something guilty. But Emily, she was different. The moment she saw me, I could see a shift in her expression. It wasn't shock or regret. It was a defensive, almost dismissive look. Oh, great, she said, rolling her eyes. You couldn't just trust me, could you? Her voice wasn't remorseful. It wasn't apologetic. It was as if I was the one in the wrong for interrupting their little game. I stood there for a moment, trying to process her words, trying to keep the anger that was boiling up inside of me in check. What the hell is this, Emily? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. She took her time sitting up, flipping her hair back and glancing at Mark before turning her attention back to me. It's really not a big deal, Andrew, she said, her tone casual, almost like she was talking about a minor inconvenience. You're overreacting. I stared at her, incredulous. Overreacting? How could she be so calm about this? How could she sit there in front of me, acting like nothing was wrong? Like I wasn't watching the woman I had loved for years casually throw everything away for a quick thrill. The anger inside me started to swell, but I held it back for a moment, wanting to hear her out. Emily, this isn't just some misunderstanding, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I saw you. I saw you with him, in our pool. What the hell is going on? She gave me a look like I was some kind of inconvenience in her life. It's just fun, Andrew, she replied. You've been so distant lately. I don't know, maybe you wouldn't understand. Mark makes me feel alive. He doesn't make me feel invisible. The words hit me harder than any physical blow. My mind was spinning. What was I hearing? Was she seriously blaming me for this? Had I really been that bad of a husband? I wanted to scream, to shout, to let out all the rage I felt building up inside me. But I didn't. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm. I needed answers. I needed to understand. Emily, I said, my voice quieter now, how long has this been going on? She shrugged nonchalantly, as if the answer didn't matter. A few months, I guess. But honestly, I've been feeling like this for a while. You just don't get me anymore. It felt like someone had ripped my heart out and stomped on it. A few months? How could she have been hiding this from me for that long? How could she have been sneaking around, betraying me, all while acting like everything was fine at home? Mark, who had been silent up until now, decided to chime in. Man, it's really not what you think. We were just having some fun, okay? Emily and I, we're adults. We don't need to explain ourselves to you. I snapped my gaze toward him, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles were white. This guy, this arrogant jerk, had the nerve to stand there and talk to me like that? He wasn't even trying to apologize. Instead, he was making it seem like I was the one in the wrong for confronting them. Shut up, Mark, I said through gritted teeth. You have no right to say anything. You're the one who's been sleeping with my wife behind my back. He took a step back, his face showing a flicker of doubt, but then he quickly recovered his cocky attitude. Hey, don't blame me. Blame her. She's the one who wanted it. I could feel the blood boiling in my veins. My pulse was racing, and every fiber of my being wanted to do something, anything, to make them both feel the weight of what they had done. But I had to keep it together. I had to focus on Emily. I turned back to her, searching her eyes for any sign of remorse, but all I saw was indifference. It was like she didn't care. It was as if everything we had shared, meant nothing to her. Do you even care about me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Do you care about our marriage? Her expression didn't change. Of course I care about you, Andrew. But you don't make me feel alive anymore. Mark does. He's fun. He gets me. Those words pierced through me like a knife. She wasn't just admitting to the affair. She was telling me that I wasn't enough for her. That I had failed as a husband, as a partner. The reality of it all was crashing down on me, and I felt like I was suffocating. Is this it, then? I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. Is this the end of us? Emily didn't respond right away. She looked at Mark for a brief moment before turning back to me. Maybe it is, Andrew. I don't know. You figure it out. And with that, she stood up, walking out of the pool and heading toward the house, leaving me standing there, broken, confused, and lost. Mark followed her, giving me a smug, satisfied look as he passed. I stood there for a few moments, unable to process what had just happened. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, was gone. And in her place was someone I didn't even recognize. Someone who had thrown everything away for some fleeting thrill. I felt a deep emptiness in my chest, like the life I had built had just been ripped apart. But as the anger started to build again, I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't done. I needed answers. I needed to make a decision. And I wasn't going to let this betrayal go unanswered. I couldn't stand still. The anger inside of me was like a beast, pacing in a cage, scratching at the walls of my mind. I needed to confront this, to get to the bottom of everything. I wasn't going to let Emily walk away like that, like nothing had happened. The weight of her words, the coldness in her eyes, stung deeper than any punch could. I waited for what felt like an eternity, pacing in the backyard, trying to control my breathing. Mark and Emily had gone inside, and the house felt suffocating. I could hear their voices from the kitchen, but I couldn't make out the words. It didn't matter. What was there left to say? The truth was out. The woman I married, the woman I trusted more than anyone in the world, had betrayed me. And for what? For some thrill, for someone who made her feel alive? It didn't make sense. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was everything that led to this. The lies. The excuses. The betrayal of everything we had worked for together. I finally decided to go inside, to face Emily. To demand answers. But as I walked through the door, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and my mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts. There they were, sitting at the kitchen table like nothing was wrong. Emily was sitting across from Mark, her eyes cold, her expression distant. It was like she had already moved on, already made her choice. I wasn't even in the picture anymore. I stood there for a moment, just watching them. Emily looked up at me, but there was no remorse in her eyes. Just that same cold indifference. "Andrew, what do you want?" she asked, her tone flat and dismissive. I clenched my fists. "I want the truth. I want to know why. Why you did this. Why you felt the need to lie, to sneak around. Why this wasn't enough for you." She didn't flinch. "I already told you. You haven't been enough for a long time, Andrew. You've been distant, cold. I needed someone who actually paid attention to me." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Distant. Cold. That was her excuse. I had worked hard to provide for us, to build a future. I had tried to be a good husband. I thought that was enough. But apparently, it wasn't. I wasn't enough. "Mark pays attention to you, huh?" I said bitterly, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what this is? A quick fix?" Emily rolled her eyes. "You wouldn't understand. He makes me feel important." "You don't. You just don't get it, Andrew. I'm tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not." Mark leaned forward, his voice dripping with smugness. "Listen, man, it's really not that serious. You're just upset because you got caught. We're both adults here. Emily's not a kid. She knows what she wants." The audacity of him. The arrogance. Here he was, sitting in my kitchen, acting like he had some right to justify what they had done. This wasn't some game. This was my life, my wife, and my heart. And yet, they were acting like it was just some casual affair. "Shut the hell up, Mark," I said, my voice low but fierce. "You're not going to sit here and make excuses for what you did. You knew what you were doing. You knew exactly what this would do to me." Mark didn't say anything after that. He just leaned back in his chair, as if he had no intention of backing down. Emily, on the other hand, was staring at me, her expression unreadable. There was no guilt in her eyes. No remorse. Nothing that even remotely resembled the woman I had married. I turned back to her. "Emily, do you even care about me? Or was this just some game? Were we just some phase for you? Some person you could control?" She didn't look away. "I care about you, Andrew. But I'm not in love with you anymore. And I haven't been for a while." Her words cut deep. "Not in love with me anymore?" I repeated, the pain making my voice crack. "So what, you've just been going through the motions. I'm not going to apologize for wanting to feel something, for wanting to feel alive," she said, her voice cold and detached. "You stopped being that for me a long time ago." The reality of it all hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't some slip-up. She had made a choice. She had chosen Mark over me. She had chosen a life of excitement, of novelty, over the years we had spent together. I felt numb, disconnected. The woman I thought I knew, who I thought loved me, was gone. Replaced by someone I didn't even recognize. Someone who could look me in the eye and tell me that she didn't love me anymore, without an ounce of remorse. "You really don't care, do you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "About everything we built. About the life we shared." "No, I don't," she replied, the words coming out like a bitter pill. "It's just not enough for me anymore. I'm done pretending. It was over. There was no saving this. I realized that now. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with everything, had shattered my heart beyond repair. And there was nothing left to hold on to. For the next few moments, there was silence in the room, thick and suffocating. The weight of her words, of her actions, hung heavy in the air. Mark's smug grin was still plastered on his face. But I didn't care anymore. All I wanted was out. I turned and walked out of the kitchen without saying another word. I needed to get away. I needed to clear my head. But as I walked out the door, a part of me already knew, there was no coming back from this. I walked out of the kitchen, my mind spinning in 1,000 directions. Everything around me seemed to blur. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think straight. The only thing that kept echoing in my mind were Emily's words, "I'm not in love with you anymore." She said it like it was nothing, like it was a simple fact, like it didn't shatter everything we had built together. The pain was suffocating. I didn't know where to go, so I just kept walking. I stepped into the backyard, my eyes locking on the pool where I had just witnessed the biggest betrayal of my life. Emily and Mark had left, no doubt off to enjoy their little affair in peace, leaving me behind in the wreckage of what used to be my marriage. I stood by the pool for a long time, trying to process everything, trying to make sense of it all. The water was calm, but inside, I was anything but. There was a storm brewing in my chest, and I felt like I was drowning in it. Everything had seemed fine just a few weeks ago. Emily and I had been happy, or at least, I thought we were. We had our ups and downs, sure, but who doesn't? I thought we were building a life together, one that we would grow old in. But now, all of that seemed like a lie. How long had Emily been unhappy? How long had she been planning this? I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could I have missed all the signs? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, almost mechanically. My hands were shaking. I knew what I had to do. It was time to make a choice. But the idea of divorce, of walking away from everything I had ever known, felt like a death sentence. Was I really going to end this? Was I really going to let her go, knowing everything we had was now a lie? I dialed the number of a lawyer, my mind numb to everything else. I needed legal advice. I needed to know my options, even if I wasn't ready to take that step yet. The phone rang a few times before someone answered. "Hello, this is Linda. How can I help you?" "Hi," I said, my voice trembling despite myself. "I need to know how divorce works. I'm thinking about separating from my wife." Linda was professional, and in some twisted way, her calmness comforted me. "I understand. You've come to the right place. I can walk you through the process, but before we get started, I'll need some basic information. May I ask what's brought you to this decision?" I paused, my mind racing. How could I explain the depth of the betrayal? How could I put into words the feeling of my entire life being ripped apart in front of me? "My wife cheated on me," I said, the words hanging in the air between us. "She's been seeing someone else for months, and I just can't do this anymore." There was a long pause on the other end. I didn't need to hear her response to know that she was processing my pain. Linda finally spoke. "I'm so sorry to hear that. It's a difficult thing to go through. If you're serious about divorce, the first step is gathering any evidence you can. That can be important, especially if you're considering custody or splitting assets." "Evidence," I repeated, almost in a daze. The idea of collecting evidence felt cold, like I was preparing for battle. And in a way, I was. This wasn't just an emotional decision. This was a legal process, a breaking point. But it still felt surreal. "I'll get started on it," I said, my voice low. "Thanks." I hung up the phone and just stood there in the backyard, staring out at the pool. I didn't know what to do next. It felt like the world was closing in on me. Emily's betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was a betrayal of everything I had built. The life we had shared, the years of trust and love, now felt like they meant nothing. I walked into the house, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. The walls felt like they were closing in, the silence of the house suffocating me. I needed to get out. I needed to clear my head. I grabbed my jacket and keys and drove aimlessly, not knowing where I was going, just needing to escape the thoughts that kept spiraling in my mind. I found myself driving to a bar on the outskirts of town, a place I hadn't been in years. I wasn't there for company. I wasn't there for anything except to drown out the constant thoughts of betrayal that were eating away at me. I needed to numb the pain, if only for a little while. I sat at the bar, ordering a drink. The bartender didn't ask questions. He just poured me a glass of whiskey, and I swallowed it down without a second thought. The burn in my throat matched the fire in my chest, and for a moment, I felt a brief flicker of relief. But it didn't last. It never lasts. The pain was still there, gnawing at me, reminding me of what I had lost. I spent the next few hours at the bar, nursing my drink and trying to lose myself in the noise of the crowd. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily and Mark. I saw them laughing together, touching each other like they had all the time in the world. I saw her cold, indifferent face when she told me she wasn't in love with me anymore. Those words kept repeating in my mind like a broken record. I wasn't ready to go home. Not yet. Not while the pain was still so fresh. So I stayed at the bar, trying to escape, trying to forget, even if only for a few more hours. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep running from the truth. Eventually, I would have to face it. I would have to face the reality of my broken marriage. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that yet. I woke up the next morning with a heavy head and an even heavier heart. The alcohol from the night before had dulled the pain, but it hadn't erased it. It wasn't just the betrayal I was dealing with, it was the complete collapse of everything I had built. My marriage, my trust, everything was now a pile of broken pieces, scattered across the floor, impossible to put back together. As I lay there in the darkness of the bedroom, I could feel the weight of Emily's absence. The bed felt cold. It had always been warm, a place of comfort. But now, it was just another reminder of everything that was lost. I turned over and saw her side of the bed, untouched. It didn't matter anymore. She wasn't coming back. I could still hear her voice in my head, the way she had told me she wasn't in love with me anymore. The way she'd casually shrugged off the affair. No remorse. No real explanation. It was like I had been nothing to her, like I had meant nothing. I reached for my phone, hoping that maybe there was some sort of message waiting for me, some sort of sign that things weren't as broken as they seemed. But of course, there was nothing. No apology. No explanation. Not even a message from her. I stood up and walked into the kitchen, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The house was empty, just like the hole in my chest. I had no idea what to do next. It felt like I was stuck in a fog, unable to see clearly, unable to make a decision. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, trying to organize my thoughts. My mind was still reeling. Part of me wanted to lash out, to confront her, to make her feel the pain I was feeling. But the other part of me, the part that still wanted to fix things, that still loved her, even after everything, wanted to hear her out, to give her a chance to explain herself. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't something I could fix. Emily had already made her decision. She had chosen Mark over me. She had chosen excitement over the stability we once had. She didn't care about me anymore. I wasn't enough. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through contacts before dialing Linda, the divorce lawyer. I had to take the next step. It was time. The longer I waited, the more I was just dragging this out, torturing myself. I needed to get this over with. I needed to take control of my life again. The phone rang, and Linda picked up after the second ring. "Hello, Andrew. How are you doing?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I'm not good, Linda. It's worse than I thought. I'm going through with it. I need to start the divorce process. I can't keep living like this." There was a moment of silence on the other end. "I'm sorry you're going through this. I understand how difficult it can be, but you're making the right choice. It's better to move on and start healing. Do you want to meet today to go over the details?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's meet." As soon as I hung up, the decision felt more real, like it had already started, like there was no turning back. My entire world was changing, and I was powerless to stop it. I wasn't ready for this. But I had to be. I spent the next few hours getting ready, my mind filled with questions I didn't have answers to. Where would I go? Where would I live? How would I tell my friends and family? And how the hell would I face Emily again? The thought of facing her, of confronting her about everything, made me sick to my stomach. She had already moved on. She had already chosen him. What was left for me to say? What was left for us to even talk about? I met Linda at her office. She was professional, as expected, but I could see the sympathy in her eyes. She was used to dealing with these kinds of situations, but that didn't make it any easier. "Let's get down to it," she said, as I sat down in front of her desk. "We'll start by gathering all the information we need to move forward. We'll need to file for divorce, and if you're considering custody of any assets or if you want to fight for alimony, we'll have to work out the details. Do you have any children, Andrew?" I shook my head. "No kids. No complications there." She nodded, making notes on her clipboard. "That simplifies things a bit. But we'll still need to figure out the division of assets. How do you feel about your current living situation? Do you want to stay in the house?" I hadn't even thought about the house. My mind was still reeling from the betrayal, from Emily's callousness. But now, the reality of it all was sinking in. The house was supposed to be a place of peace, of refuge. But now, it felt like a prison. I didn't want to stay there, not after everything that had happened. I didn't want any part of it. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I think it's time to move on. I need to get out of there. I need a fresh start." Linda wrote something down on her notepad. "I understand. It's important that you start the process of emotionally detaching from her as well. You can't keep holding on to something that isn't there anymore." I nodded, but the truth was, it felt impossible to let go. Even though I knew Emily was gone, even though I knew what she had done, part of me still wished it wasn't true. Part of me still wanted her back, despite everything. Linda continued outlining the legal process for the divorce. It was a blur of information, documents, court dates, timelines. But none of it mattered. I wasn't listening. All I could hear in my head were Emily's words, "I'm not in love with you anymore." I felt the weight of it all, the loneliness, the betrayal, the anger. But deep down, I knew this was the only way forward. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep being a part of a marriage that was already dead. When the meeting ended, I walked out of Linda's office with a sense of finality. This was happening. There was no turning back now. The drive home was long, the silence inside the car deafening. I couldn't stop replaying everything that had happened over the last 24 hours, Emily's cold indifference, the way she had looked at me as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience in her life. I didn't recognize her anymore. I didn't recognize myself either. I parked the car in the driveway, staring at the house for a moment. It felt like a stranger's home. This was the house I had shared with Emily, the place where we had celebrated our victories, our anniversaries, our little moments of joy. Now, it just felt like a tombstone marking the end of everything we had built. I walked inside slowly, not knowing what to expect. The house was eerily quiet. The air was thick with the tension of the past few days. I could feel the weight of every memory hanging in the air, every smile, every laugh, every touch, all of it now tainted by the affair, by the betrayal. I stood in the living room for a few moments, unsure of where to go, unsure of what to do next. Then, I heard her. Emily's voice came from the kitchen, the sound of her humming a song softly, like everything was normal. I took a deep breath, knowing I couldn't avoid this confrontation anymore. I needed answers. I needed closure, even if that meant ripping open the wounds that had barely started to heal. I walked into the kitchen and saw her standing there, her back to me, preparing something to eat. She didn't even turn around when I entered. It was like she had already moved on, like she had already forgotten about me. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't just walk away from this. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but heavy with emotion. "We need to talk." She froze for a moment but didn't turn around. I could tell she was avoiding me, trying to pretend like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It hadn't been fine for a long time. Finally, she turned around, and her expression was cold, almost bored. "What now, Andrew?" she asked, her voice flat. "I've already told you everything. What more do you want?" I felt my chest tighten. How could she be so casual? So indifferent? Did she not realize how deeply she had hurt me? How could she sit there, making it seem like this was just some trivial thing? But she did. And I hated her for it. "I want the truth," I said, trying to keep my composure. "The whole truth. Not your excuses, not your lies. Why, Emily? Why did you do this?" She crossed her arms and leaned against the counter, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I told you, Andrew. I didn't feel loved anymore. I didn't feel important. You stopped paying attention to me. Mark makes me feel alive, makes me feel wanted. What's wrong with that?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was blaming me, just like I knew she would. She was making this all my fault. As if the betrayal was my fault for not being the person she wanted me to be. But I had tried. I had tried to be a good husband, to be there for her, to love her with everything I had. And this was how she repaid me. "I never stopped loving you, Emily," I said, my voice breaking. "I never stopped trying. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? By sleeping with someone else? By throwing everything away for some cheap thrill?" Her face softened slightly, but only for a moment. She let out a sigh and shook her head, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "You don't get it, Andrew. I needed more than just your love. I needed passion, excitement. I needed to feel like I mattered. And with Mark, I felt that. With you, I felt invisible." The pain in my chest intensified. I wanted to scream, to shout at her, to make her understand how much she had destroyed. But there was no point. She had already made her decision. She had already chosen him over me. And now, all I was left with were the broken pieces of my heart and a marriage that was beyond saving. I took a step back, my mind racing. "So that's it then?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You've made your choice. You're done with me?" She didn't answer at first. She just looked at me with that cold, detached expression, as if everything we had built together didn't matter. "I'm not done with you, Andrew. But I'm done pretending. I'm done trying to make something work that's already broken." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This was it. This was the end. There was no going back now. Emily had already moved on, and I was just a casualty of her selfishness. I had never imagined that our marriage would end like this. I had never imagined that the woman I loved would betray me so completely. I turned to leave, the weight of her words heavy on my shoulders. But before I could walk out of the room, she spoke again. "Andrew," she called after me, her voice softer now, almost uncertain. Are you sure about this? Are you really sure you want to throw everything away? I paused, standing at the doorway, the finality of it all sinking in. I turned around slowly, meeting her gaze. You already threw everything away, Emily. I'm just trying to pick up the pieces. And with that, I walked out, leaving her standing in the kitchen, probably already forgetting about me. The days after my confrontation with Emily blurred together. I moved through them like a ghost, numb, detached, as if I was merely going through the motions of life without actually living it. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. The silence that once brought comfort now felt like a suffocating weight, pressing down on my chest. I couldn't bring myself to look at anything that reminded me of Emily. The pictures on the walls, the little things we had shared, our first vacation, our anniversaries, the moments that once meant everything to me. They all felt like lies now, like things that had never mattered. I didn't want to face the reality of what I had lost, but I couldn't avoid it anymore. The divorce proceedings had begun. Linda, the lawyer, had been professional, but every step of the process felt like a stab to my heart. The forms, the paperwork, the negotiations over assets, it all felt cold, mechanical. There was no emotion in any of it. It was just business. But I knew that I had to do this. It was the only way I could take back control of my life. I spent most of my time out of the house, trying to avoid the constant reminders of what I had lost. I went to the gym to work off the anger, to try to clear my head. But even there, I couldn't escape the thoughts of Emily and Mark. I couldn't escape the vision of her laughing in his arms, the way she had looked at me with such indifference. The betrayal haunted me every moment of the day. One evening, after another grueling workout, I sat in my car, parked outside the gym, just staring at the steering wheel. I had to admit it to myself. I had to face the fact that I was hurt, that I was angry, and that I wasn't going to be able to just move on in an instant. The pain was raw, and no amount of working out or distracting myself was going to fix it. I had to let myself feel it. I had to face the truth. The truth was simple, I was grieving. I was mourning the loss of my marriage, of the person I thought I knew. I was mourning the life I thought I was going to have. And I was angry, so damn angry, at Emily for making me feel like I wasn't enough. For making me feel like all the love and effort I had poured into our relationship meant nothing. I sat there for a long time, letting the tears fall. I didn't try to hold them back this time. I didn't care about appearing strong or in control. I was broken, and I needed to let myself grieve. I needed to accept that Emily was gone, that the life I had built with her was gone, and that I needed to start over. When I finally made my way back home, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't fully healed, but I was starting to accept the reality of my situation. I had spent so long trying to fix things that I had forgotten the most important step. I had to let go. I had to let go of the anger, the betrayal, and the idea of the life I had imagined. Only then could I begin to rebuild. The next morning, I called Linda again. I needed to move forward with the divorce, and I needed to make sure that I was taking the right steps. I wasn't going to sit around anymore, wallowing in self-pity. I had made the decision, and now it was time to make it official. After we discussed the next steps, I hung up and walked into the living room. For the first time in days, I actually felt like I was in control of my life again. I wasn't going to let Emily's actions define me. I wasn't going to let her betrayal hold me back any longer. I started packing. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Every corner of it reminded me of her. I couldn't escape it, and I couldn't heal in a place that held so many painful memories. I packed up my things, not in a hurry, but with a sense of purpose. I was leaving behind the past. I was leaving behind the pain, the lies, and the heartbreak. I was moving forward, one step at a time. As I loaded my things into the car, I thought about the future. It was terrifying, but it was also full of possibility. I didn't know what was coming next, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance to create something new for myself. Something better. I didn't know where I was going to live yet, but I was going to figure it out. I didn't know what the future held, but I was going to face it head on. I wasn't going to let Emily's betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let her be the last chapter of my story. As I drove away from the house, I felt a sense of freedom, something I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't complete, but it was a start. I was no longer bound to the past. I was moving forward, and that was all I could do. The days that followed my decision to leave the house felt like an odd mixture of liberation and fear. It was as though a door had slammed shut behind me, leaving me standing in a new, unfamiliar place, one that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had left everything behind, the house, the memories, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, and now I had to figure out who I was without it all. The first thing I did was find a small apartment, somewhere distant from the life I had known with Emily. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with bare walls and an air of emptiness, but it was mine. And for the first time in months, I felt like I had a little control over something again. I wasn't drowning in memories. I wasn't haunted by reminders of a past that had betrayed me. The apartment was fresh, blank, and full of potential, much like I hoped I could be. As I unpacked my few belongings, I realized how much of myself I had left behind when I had been with Emily. I had sacrificed so many of my own desires, my own interests, just to be a good partner. I had lost touch with who I really was, and in doing so, I had allowed myself to become someone I didn't even recognize. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had changed for someone who was no longer even a part of my life. The apartment became my space, a place where I could begin to rediscover myself. It wasn't easy. The loneliness crept in, especially at night when the silence felt deafening. There were moments when I missed Emily, when I wanted to reach out to her, to hear her voice again, to pretend everything could go back to the way it was. But then I remembered the coldness in her eyes, the way she had dismissed everything we had built together. She had chosen to betray me, to leave me behind, and that was something I could never forget. I found myself spending a lot of time walking, exploring the city, just trying to get used to being alone. I went to coffee shops, sat in parks, just trying to take in the world around me, trying to breathe again. At times, it felt like I was learning how to live for the first time in years. I had spent so much time in a relationship, in a life that had become a cage, that I had forgotten what it felt like to just exist as myself. I also started reconnecting with old friends, people I had lost touch with when I had been consumed by my marriage. They were a breath of fresh air, reminding me that I still had a world outside of the one Emily had taken away. We went out to bars, played video games, and talked about life. It wasn't the same as it had been before, but it felt good to laugh again, to feel like I wasn't entirely alone in this world. But as the weeks passed, I began to realize something important. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my past. I couldn't keep letting Emily's betrayal control me. I had to let go of the anger, the hurt, and the disappointment. Holding on to those emotions was only holding me back from moving forward. I needed to forgive her, not for her, but for me. I needed to set myself free from the chains of resentment that had been weighing me down. It wasn't easy. Every time I thought about what she had done, the anger flared up again, and I wanted to lash out, to make her feel the same pain I had. But as I spent more time on my own, I started to realize that the only person I was hurting by holding on to that anger was myself. Emily was gone. She had made her choice, and nothing I did or said would change that. The only thing I could control now was my own path, my own healing. So, I started to focus on myself, on my health, my career, and my happiness. I signed up for a yoga class, something I had always wanted to do but had never made time for. I started cooking again, experimenting with new recipes, and rediscovering the joy of preparing meals for myself. I also took up photography, something I had always enjoyed but had pushed aside for Emily's sake. These small changes, these small steps toward rediscovering who I was, felt like a lifeline. It felt like I was reclaiming pieces of myself that I had forgotten existed. It wasn't long before I started to realize that, despite everything that had happened, I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I had survived the worst betrayal, and I was still standing. The pain was still there, but it wasn't overwhelming me anymore. I had taken control of my life again, and that gave me a sense of power that I had never known before. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself sitting on the couch in my apartment, reflecting on the journey I had been on. There were still hard days, of course. Days when the loneliness would creep back in, when the memories would flood my mind and threaten to drown me. But there were more good days than bad now. And those good days were starting to outnumber the bad ones. I thought back to the day I had left Emily, to the way I had walked out of that house, leaving behind everything I had known. It felt like a lifetime ago. And in many ways, it was. I had walked away from a life that had no place for me, from a person who had no place for me. And now, I was finally starting to build a new life, one that was entirely mine. I didn't need her. I didn't need anyone to define me. I was enough on my own. As I sat there, I realized something that had taken me a long time to understand: healing isn't a straight path. It's messy. It's complicated. And it's filled with setbacks. But each day, each step forward, no matter how small, gets you closer to a place of peace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with myself. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the life I had imagined when I was with Emily. But it was mine, and it was enough. And that was all I needed.